Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with the new reference recordings. Now, these are going to be tricky little chats. I've already done a couple of them. And I think the problem is that it's almost a contradiction in terms. Because the whole idea of the original reference recording series was to talk about what the consensus was, about what the great recordings, what the ideal, the reference, the version of reference is for specific works. And for that to happen, the circumstances, the environment had to be in a particular way so that the consensus in question could form. And then it's just a question of recognizing what that consensus was. And we can argue about that based on our own personal experience, but since mine is broader than any of yours, I'm always right. And it's really pretty straightforward, right? Yes? Okay. Anyway. However, for the new consensus, one of the linchpins of the reference recording series is that we don't have them anymore, or we have very few of them. It's very hard to determine what a consensus is because the whole classical music universe is completely fragmented. It's fragmented because of the ridiculous quantity of stuff that's out there, because of the various ways in which people can access it, because the major labels there are labels all over the place, but the major labels don't make any effort to sell anything anymore. So all of the inputs that went into forming the consensus, not just performance quality, which was of course first and foremost, but also marketing and distribution, and the fact that it was a physical product and people could gather together in record stores and on specific magazines and things to talk about them, all that's gone. It's all gone. So coming up with new reference recordings is difficult. So what this really is going to be, this series of videos, are thought experiments on the assumption that consensus could exist. What kind of a performance of a popular work would be our modern selection for a consensus choice? And I'm making an assumption that actually people know about it and that record labels want to sell it, which is a big, big assumption because it's not happening. I mean, it's really just not happening. But on all things being equal, let's seize the bull by the horns and start with, the ultimate, most iconic thing that we can think of, the Beethoven Symphony cycle. Which Beethoven Symphony cycle should be the modern reference? What are the criteria? All right, on the assumption that, like I said, that it's actually being marketed and sold, and that, first of all, has to be superb performances. Second of all, it has to be period instrument influenced, because that's the big thing that's happened to performance of this music in the past 3 or 4 decades. We may want to or stick with a traditional favorite, and there may be fabulous performances of these symphonies still being recorded by modern artists with modern orchestras in the more traditional vein. But it's very, very hard to come across a modern performance of a Beethoven symphony that has not been influenced by the strictures of the period instrument movement. That is, generally speaking, quicker tempos, often performances by reduced sized ensembles, hard sticking timpani, strings with minimal vibrato, all of that stuff. And we just have to acknowledge, they've won that battle. And the reason they won that battle isn't because they're right. They won that battle because they're different, because they created a sonority that allowed people to hear the music afresh. And that's a good enough reason. Frankly, all the scholarly folderol that goes along with it is just so much bullshit. It's totally unnecessary. The only thing that matters is, do we like what the thing sounds like? Or does it appeal to us? Does the approach speak to us in some way? And it does, to a lot of people, to most people. So like my personal opinion of the period instrument movement, which many of you may have guessed by now, is irrelevant to the question of what the new reference recording is. We have to be able to step back and place our prejudices to one side and basically simply acknowledge the reality of the situation and understand what a great performance is within its own parameters. within those parameters. And I mean that in the broadest sense, because while I accept the period instrument approach, I do not believe that the reference recording has to necessarily be one on period instruments. And the reason I say that is because period instrument performances are, generally speaking, inferior to performances on modern instruments because the quality of the instruments is inferior. I mean, it's really pretty straightforward. And I think sometimes you don't always have the best musicians. You don't have the most, wonderfully constituted ensembles, ensemble values, and things like that. So my view is that the new reference for Beethoven cycles will have to be period instrument style on modern instruments, more or less, mostly modern instruments, let's put it that way. That is, with a group that represents the highest and best standards of technical performance. And that's, I think, about as far as we can go with it, right? Reasonably. It has to be sonically wonderful. And like I said, the interpretations have to be powerful and strong and delicious and delightful. And so I have the modern reference. The modern reference for Beethoven cycles is unquestionably Paavo Järvi with the Deutsche Kammerphilharmonie Bremen. Basically just known as the Deutsche Kammerphilharmonie, because German titles get longer and longer, as we've noticed recently. Anyway, this is, by any standard, and you can read reviews of all the individual releases on classicstoday.com, an outstanding Beethoven cycle. It's exciting. It's brilliantly played. I mean, this is one of the great chamber ensembles ever, and their playing is outstanding. And Järvi is a dynamic and exciting conductor who has a real feel for the music. And they play the pants off of these pieces. They really do. They are entirely consistent with period instrument orthodoxy as regards swift tempos, slashing rhythms, prominent trumpets and drums, minimal string vibrato, all the things that the period instrument people do. However, there are also interpretive aspects which are welcomely personal in each of the performances, in all of these performances, that distinguish them from the cookie-cutter average of period instrument type performances, and they are splendidly recorded. So, I don't have to talk in detail about each performance. Like I said, you can go read the reviews on classicstoday.com, and I recommend that you do that. That would be a very good idea to get a better sense of why these are so splendid. But I really think that if we have to come up with a modern reference recording that we can all get in on and say we enjoy and like, and whether it's our favorite or not isn't the point. It doesn't have to be your favorite. It has to be one whose excellence you can recognize and accept, even while detesting certain things about it, if that's the way it has to be. I think it's all pretty much splendid, personally. Personally, I do. But I didn't pick it that way for that reason, because there are lots of period instrument style performances that we could have selected. But this one, I think, says it all. It's a chamber orchestra. It's a great chamber orchestra. It's got all of those qualities that the modern reference recording is likely to have. And let's simply agree that in the year, 57, 84, we're going to get back together and we're going to see how right we were. Maybe there will be a consensus. You never know. You never know. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks so much for joining me. Take care.